It was early morning in West Africa, the kind of quiet hour when most families are preparing for a normal day. But on this particular morning, the 27th of November, nothing felt normal. At a small airport in northern Nigeria, a lawyer, a brother, and a worried young wife stepped onto the tarmac with one purpose: to visit a man many call a rebel, but millions believe is a prisoner of conscience. His name is Nnamdi Kanu. They were not traveling for celebration, nor for routine legal business. They were traveling to Sokoto State Correctional Facility, a place the government insists is safe and secure. Yet only hours after their arrival, something deeply unsettling happened. A violent bandit attack struck a nearby village, just 25 to 40 minutes from the prison where Nnamdi is held. For a family already carrying fear in their hearts, this was not just news. It was a message: nothing about this case is simple, and nothing about this moment is coincidence. At the very same time, hundreds of miles away in Abuja, the federal high court issued a summons demanding Nnamdi Kanu appear for a crucial step in his appeal. But then, almost unbelievably, the same court refused to sign the document that would allow the prison to bring him there. A man is ordered to appear yet forbidden from leaving his cell. What kind of justice works that way? And tomorrow, on November 28th, another moment is coming, a moment not in a courtroom, but on the world's moral stage. From London, Uche Kanu, Nnamdi's wife, plans to speak publicly in a livestream she calls decisive and clinical. She intends to send her message all the way to the Vatican, to the European Union, to the United States, and to every institution that still claims to defend human dignity. So I ask you, especially those of you watching from America, when legal doors keep closing, where does a family turn next? Faith, justice, or the conscience of the world? If stories of justice, courage, and human dignity matter to you, stay with me. And if you believe the truth is more important than the headlines, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will shape more than one man's future. When the small aircraft touched down at Sultan Abubakar International Airport, the air around the runway felt heavy. This wasn't the type of trip anyone takes lightly. Aloy Ejimakor, the lead attorney for Nnamdi Kanu, stepped out first. Close behind him was Prince Emmanuel Kanu, Nnamdi's younger brother, followed by Emmanuel's wife, her face carrying the calm determination of someone who has already cried too many tears to waste any more. They had not flown into Sokoto for politics nor for public relations. They came because a man they love and a man they believe is being treated unjustly, is being held alone inside a hardened correctional facility. Their purpose was simple: see him, speak with him, assess his condition with their own eyes, and prepare for the next legal steps in his long and painful battle for freedom. From the airport, the road to Sokoto State Correctional Facility is not long. The group followed the well-used route that cuts through a cluster of neighborhoods before reaching the gates of the prison. This is the path every visitor takes. It is direct, predictable, and, according to officials, secure. But almost as soon as they arrived in the city, the first troubling piece of news struck. A bandit attack had taken place that same day, an attack not in some far-flung region, but in Rufa village inside Raba local government area, only about 25 to 40 minutes from the very prison where Nnamdi Kanu is kept under heavy guard. The location, when viewed on a map, forms an almost perfect straight-line path between violence and confinement. The video evidence and local reports showed burned homes, terrified residents, and law enforcement scrambling to respond. Even if the exact timing was uncertain, the proximity alone was enough to raise every alarm possible. For the family and legal team, this wasn't just another news headline. It was a moment of deep, visceral fear. What if the road they traveled had crossed paths with armed criminals? What if the prison itself, labeled secured, stood in an area where bandits are known to move freely? Those questions were not paranoia. They were grounded in a harsh reality. Sokoto is known as one of the operational hubs of a notorious warlord named Bogi, often spelled Boyi, a bandit leader, whose name appears repeatedly in security reports coming from the region. Articles and intelligence assessments list him and his network as being active in Sokoto State, meaning the danger is not hypothetical. It is present, persistent, and real. And so the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. How could a man as politically sensitive as Nnamdi Kanu, someone the government claims to protect, be placed in a region where violent groups operate openly? How could officials describe such a place as safe or secure with a straight face? When Aloy Emmanuel and Emmanuel's wife arrived at the prison gate, these questions traveled with them. The guards recognized them immediately. Visits of this nature require extensive pre-approval. You cannot simply show up. You must request access days in advance, submit documentation, and receive explicit confirmation from prison authorities. Everything about this process underscored just how tightly controlled Nnamdi's detention is. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile and tense. The meeting with Nnamdi took place under strict supervision, security officers standing close, monitoring every movement, every spoken word. Cameras watched, doors locked behind each step they took. The lawyer and the family were allowed to speak with him, but only within the limits set by the staff on duty. Still, in the midst of all this, one thing stood out: Nnamdi Kanu appeared resilient. Quiet but firm, guarded but not broken. Aloy would later describe him as indomitable, drawing a comparison carefully but unmistakably to Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. But outside those heavily guarded walls, the truth remained unchanged. The family's plane had landed in a state where bandits roam freely. A violent attack had erupted not far from the prison, and the government's claim of a secure facility had become harder than ever to believe. As the visit ended and the family stepped back out into the burning Sokoto afternoon, a troubling realization settled in. The danger wasn't just in the courtroom battles or political maneuvers, it was in the physical landscape itself. The journey to see Nnamdi Kanu had become more than a visit. It had become a reminder that this case now sits at the intersection of law security and human vulnerability, and the road ahead will not be easy. As the heavy steel doors of the Sokoto prison closed behind the visiting family, another storm, this time a legal one, was already gathering miles away in Abuja. While the emotional weight of the trip lingered on their shoulders, a new message reached Aloy's phone. It was a notice from the Federal High Court, a summons demanding that Nnamdi Kanu appear in person on November 28th for a crucial procedure known as the settlement of the record of appeal. For anyone unfamiliar with the legal world, this step may sound technical, almost ordinary. But for a man in detention, and for a case as politically charged as this one, it is anything but simple. In appellate practice, settling the record means laying every card on the table. It requires both sides, Nnamdi's team and the government prosecutors, to present the exact documents, filings, and evidence they intend to rely on before the Court of Appeal. Nothing can move forward until those materials are officially confirmed on the record. For the appeals process to be fair, the appellant must be physically present, especially when he is representing himself in part of the proceedings. And that was precisely the problem. To appear in Abuja, Nnamdi must legally be produced by the Sokoto State Correctional Facility. They cannot move him without an explicit order known as a production warrant. Even if they wanted to comply with the summons, they were legally powerless without the signature of the judge, but the judge refused to sign it. The contradiction was stunning in its simplicity and devastating in its impact. The court ordered Nnamdi to appear, but blocked him from leaving his cell. When Aloy made this public, people reacted with disbelief, then anger, then a deep sense of resignation that only comes from watching the same pattern repeat itself. He posted the notice online for the world to see, the summons demanding Nnamdi's presence, the date November 28th clearly printed, and the quiet admission that the very same court refused to issue the one document that would make compliance possible. How, people asked, can a man be expected to appear in court when the court itself bars the door across Nigeria, especially among communities who have followed this case for years? Emotions began to flare. Analysts, activists, commentators, they all saw the same thing: a legal system playing a dangerous game of appearances. A summons makes it look as if due process is being followed. A refusal to issue the production warrant makes sure the process never truly unfolds. To many, it felt less like justice and more like choreography, an elaborate performance meant to create the illusion of fairness while keeping the man at the center of it all in permanent confinement. But while legal circles argued and supporters reacted, another voice began rising from far away from London, where Uche Kanu, Nnamdi's wife, was preparing for something unprecedented. Earlier that day, she had released a statement announcing a live stream scheduled for November 28th at 10:00 p.m. UK time, a broadcast she described as decisive and clinical. Her message was not directed only at Nigerians. It was aimed at the moral institutions of the world: the Pope, the European Union, the US government, and the United Nations. Her digital flyer spread quickly online. The headline read, "A plea for justice, safety, humanity, and dignity." For many, that flyer became a symbol of a turning point. If the courts would not open their doors, perhaps the conscience of the world would. Her plan was bold. Once she finished her live stream, she would send formal documentation about her husband's treatment letters, medical concerns, legal irregularities to international bodies. And there was something else, something that felt almost symbolic. On the same day she would speak, Pope Francis was traveling through Turkey and Lebanon regions bordering the spiritual and political crossroads of the world. Some saw this as coincidence, others read deeper meaning into the timing, and Uche herself hinted that the moment carried weight. The Pope would be in Europe. She was already there, and the distance between her voice and his ear had never been smaller. Online, the reactions were immediate. Some applauded the move as a necessary escalation. "When your country closes every door, you knock on heaven's door," one supporter wrote. Others feared the consequences, worried that involving the Vatican and the West could provoke political backlash at home. But no one denied that this was a climax, a legal crisis in Abuja, a family shaken by a bandit attack near the prison, and now a wife appealing not to politicians but to the moral authorities of the world. In just 48 hours, this story had moved from a prison gate to the global stage, and the question became unavoidable: if justice will not come from the courtroom, where will it come from next? As November 28th approached, the day of both the court summons and Uche Kanu's global broadcast, the ripple effects of the past 48 hours began spreading far beyond Sokoto and Abuja. What had started as a simple prison visit had turned into a chain reaction touching civilians, politicians, religious institutions, and international observers. And each reaction revealed something deeper about the fragile state of justice and governance in Nigeria today. Among ordinary Nigerians, especially in the southeast, the dominant feeling was fear wrapped in frustration. The news of a bandit attack so close to the prison triggered painful questions. Many remembered past incidents in which insecurity was used as a pretext for silencing dissent. Parents whispered to their children about being careful, about not discussing certain topics outside the home. Traders in crowded markets repeated the same line: "If a man is not safe in a government prison, who is safe anywhere?" This sense of insecurity spilled into everyday life. Small community groups began holding quiet meetings to discuss the implications. Clergy in local churches dedicated prayer sessions to those in unjust confinement. Retired civil servants, the backbone of political memory in many towns, spoke with a tone of resignation, recalling how similar patterns had appeared in Nigeria's past: calls for reform followed by pushback, moments of hope followed by state pressure. For them, this wasn't just about Nnamdi Kanu. It was about what the state chooses to do when it feels threatened. Politically, the consequences were even sharper. Abuja suddenly found itself in an uncomfortable spotlight. The refusal to issue the production warrant created the impression, fair or not, that the government might be deliberately obstructing legal due process. Opposition parties seized on the moment quietly but firmly, asking why a man who was summoned to court was simultaneously prevented from appearing. Even politicians who normally avoided the topic began acknowledging that the situation had raised concerns about procedural integrity. Meanwhile, inside government circles, the atmosphere tightened. Some advisors reportedly pushed for silence to avoid giving the impression that the administration was reacting to public pressure. Others argued that the longer the state appeared to toy with legal procedures, the worse it would look internationally. "We cannot invite the world to respect our institutions," one analyst wrote, "while our institutions violate their own rules." Then came the Vatican dimension, a turning point few had anticipated. Uche Kanu's plan to involve Pope Francis, the European Union, the U.S. government, and the United Nations introduced a new kind of pressure, a moral pressure, not just political. It was no longer just about Nigerian law. It was about a global audience evaluating how the Nigerian state treats dissenters, minorities, and human rights claims. Diplomats stationed in Abuja began quietly taking notes. Legal scholars started discussing the possibility of Nigeria's actions being cited as examples in future human rights reports. Even foreign journalists picked up the story, drawn not only by the political tension, but also by the deeply human element: a wife appealing to the conscience of the world to save her husband. Nigerian civil society organizations, long fatigued by years of crisis, suddenly found new energy. Human rights lawyers began drafting open letters. Youth-led groups circulated petitions online demanding transparency in the appeal process. Professional associations questioned how a court could issue a summons but refuse a production warrant. What emerged was a slow but unmistakable realization. This case is no longer just about one man. It is about how the Nigerian state sees law, dissent, and the people it governs. And this realization stung because it forced many Nigerians to confront a painful truth that democratic institutions without accountability can begin to resemble the very systems they claim to oppose. But the consequences extended beyond Nigeria's borders. Across Africa, observers noted the contrast in some nations, like Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traore. Leaders speak loudly about sovereignty, justice, and dignity. In others, legal processes appear fragile and easily manipulated. The political map of West Africa is changing, and the treatment of voices like Nnamdi Kanu's has become part of that larger continental conversation. As November 28th approached, one thing was clear: this was no longer just a legal matter. It was a test of institutions, of leaders, of civilians, and of the moral fabric holding the country together. From across the Atlantic, the situation unfolding around Nnamdi Kanu may seem distant, another political struggle in another part of the world. But to many Americans, especially those who lived through the civil rights movement, the Cold War Vietnam-era protests, and the long debates over justice and constitutional rights, the echoes are unmistakable. The questions raised in Nigeria today are questions America has confronted in its own turbulent chapters. What happens when a nation's laws collide with a nation's conscience? What happens when a citizen's demand for dignity clashes with the state's desire for control? For American observers, lawyers, clergy, human rights advocates, and retired diplomats, the refusal of the Nigerian court to issue a production warrant raised immediate red flags. Procedural integrity is not a small technical matter. It is the backbone of any legal system. To many, it resembled moments in American history when courts appeared to serve political pressures rather than constitutional principles, moments people over 60 remember vividly. That is why Uche Kanu's decision to appeal to international bodies resonates so strongly. In the United States, families who once wrote letters to Washington demanding the release of wrongful detainees abroad understand her instinct. Many recall campaigns for Nelson Mandela, Václav Havel, or Soviet refuseniks. They remember how the moral voice of ordinary Americans helped shift the global conversation. The American government, of course, must walk a diplomatic line. Washington maintains a strategic relationship with Nigeria built on counterterrorism, cooperation, oil markets, and regional security. U.S. officials rarely intervene directly in politically sensitive local cases unless the human rights issues become impossible to ignore. But the signals are already there. Policy analysts writing op-eds, congressional aides monitoring reports, and advocacy groups preparing statements. In fact, some American organizations have already expressed concern about the growing pattern of arbitrary detentions, inconsistent court rulings, and the rising threat of insecurity across northern Nigeria. They see Nnamdi Kanu's case not just as an isolated legal challenge, but as part of a broader question. Is the Nigerian state strengthening or undermining the rule of law? Europe, too, is watching closely. The European Union has long tied its partnership with African governments to commitments on transparency, judicial independence, and human rights. The combination of a denied production warrant, a bandit attack near a high-security prison, and internal fractures within Nigeria's justice system is exactly the type of scenario that triggers debate in Brussels. European diplomats have quietly acknowledged that if Uche Kanu's dossier reaches the right desks, questions will be raised in the EU Human Rights Subcommittee. And then there is the Vatican, an institution with no military, no political party, no oil strategy, but immense moral influence. Pope Francis, traveling through Turkey and Lebanon, is already speaking on themes of human dignity, suffering, and justice. A carefully documented appeal from a detainee's wife, especially one framed in moral and humanitarian terms, will not go unnoticed. The Vatican rarely intervenes directly, but when it sends quiet signals behind the scenes, governments tend to listen. Across Africa, the world is also shifting. In Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and other nations, discussions around sovereignty, dignity, and justice dominate political life. Leaders like Ibrahim Traore argue that African people must reclaim their rights from external and internal forces alike, messages that deeply influence regional debates. International analysts note that how Nigeria handles the Kanu case may affect its credibility at a time when Africa's political future is being renegotiated. For global observers, the question is no longer simply whether Nnamdi Kanu is guilty or innocent. The question has become much larger. What does this case reveal about the future of justice, democracy, and human dignity in Africa? And what responsibility does the world have when those principles are tested? In the end, as November 28th draws near, this story stops being just a timeline of events, a prison visit, a bandit attack, a blocked court order, a wife preparing to speak to the world. It becomes something larger, something that touches the nerve of every society that has ever struggled with justice, power, and the fragile humanity caught between the two. For Nnamdi Kanu's family, the past 48 hours have been a storm of conflicting emotions, relief that they reached the prison safely, fear stirred by violence, nearby anger at a court that opens one door while locking another, and hope, however fragile, that the conscience of the world may finally hear their plea. These are not the emotions of political actors. They are the emotions of ordinary human beings navigating extraordinary pressure. For Nigeria, the implications run deeper. The refusal to issue the production warrant is no longer just a clerical question. It has become a symbol of something far more troubling, a system that appears willing to bend, delay, or reshape the law depending on who stands before it. A nation cannot claim moral authority, cannot claim democratic stability when its courts send mixed signals and its institutions contradict themselves. And for Africa as a whole, this moment reflects a crossroads. Across the continent, people are asking hard questions about sovereignty, dignity, and leadership. In places like Burkina Faso, where President Ibrahim Traore speaks boldly of reclaiming African autonomy, many see both inspiration and uncertainty. Can African nations truly defend justice for the weakest among them, or do they repeat the same patterns of opacity and fear that once defined the colonial era? Now, the global stage waits. The European Union holds its files open. Human rights groups sharpen their reports. The United States watches with its cautious but unmistakable concern. And somewhere in Turkey, as Pope Francis travels between historic cities, a letter may soon arrive, a plea written not with political rhetoric, but with the trembling hope of a wife asking for humanity. But here lies the warning. International attention can illuminate injustice, but it cannot fix what a nation refuses to confront. If Nigeria continues down a path where courts contradict themselves and citizens lose faith in due process, then the consequences will not stay confined to one man or one trial. They will echo through generations. So the question now belongs to all of us. What future do we envision when a country's laws no longer protect the people, but the people must protect themselves from the laws? And what role should leaders like Ibrahim Traore or any leader who speaks of sovereignty and dignity play in shaping a continent where justice is not an occasional privilege but an everyday right? If you have followed Africa news long enough, you know these moments matter. They reveal the character of nations and the courage of individuals, and they ask us quietly but urgently where we stand. So if you believe this story deserves to be heard, please share this video. If you feel you are among the first who truly seek the truth behind the headlines, let your voice be part of this conversation. And if you believe justice anywhere matters everywhere, then subscribe, because the next chapter is coming and we will walk through it together.